When I was 12 years old, I was in the 6th grade, and a group of young black female students said, you know, meet me after school, we're going to kick your white ass. And I was terrified, and of course I didn't meet them, because I didn't want my ass to get kicked.
Dun, 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 dun. Are you almost done?
Almost.
That was my great-grandmother's background.
Her father was African American, a dark-skinned African American person. Her mother, my grandmother, was from the hills of Pennsylvania. She was very light, very, very lighter than me, lighter than your mother, even. So there's a mixture right there of probably French,
Oh, then I'm a little French.
Indian,
Oh, Indian.
and runaway slaves, which are Africans. I mean, most people, if they had black blood, that was the reason. People from the south that were slaves ran to the north to get
Okay.
away from their masters. The owner of the shop did my hair. She normally didn't do my hair, but the one that did my hair wasn't there that day, and I needed it done that day. All she did is had to put a color on it. I don't even like them to style my hair. Just put a color in it, wash it out, and I'm on my way. After doing my hair, she says, well, no offense, but you have hair like a black person. So I said, well, I am a black person.
Now what did
Turned
she
a
say?
couple of shades of pink and red and didn't know what to say. Well, obviously it was a racist statement. She obviously didn't know me. Had she known, she wouldn't have said that. Come on, she's not that stupid.
Was my mom's biological father's ancestors slave owners?
No. They were Nazis. They were worse. What do you mean, what am I? Well, I'm a female.
Well, I'm a woman.
I'm a person, I'm a lawyer, I'm a daughter, I'm a friend.
Well, no, but where were you born?
Where are you from?
Oh, what are your parents or where are your parents from?
New York.
New York.
That's all that needs to be said.
The people that were asking the questions didn't have the guts to come right out and ask.
I didn't know that I was a color. You know, I'm not white or I'm not black, I'm a nigger. That's when I was made aware of that because I didn't know. You know, I wasn't raised as a white or a black child. I was raised as a child. I was playing with a little girl and she called me a nigger. I didn't understand what the word meant, but the way she said it, I knew it was a bad word. So I went home to my mother and I asked her, "What's a nigger?" She said, "That's what ignorant people call black people." And I asked my mother, I said, "Well, am I black?" She said, "Yes."
I'm black. Well, in the 60s, I'm black. It depends on what era. But yes, the same scenario. If somebody was talking and used the word nigger or whatever and didn't know me, then I would do the same thing. Well, what are you referring to? And so what do you mean by that? And they would give these stupid answers, which meant nothing, had no basis. And then at the end of the conversation, I said, well, you know, you're looking at a black woman. You know, just that's who I am.
I remember when I was in kindergarten, we had to do a report on who was someone that was very important to us. And I'm sure this was influenced by my grandmother or my mother, but I chose Martin Luther King Jr. And I remember a girl in my class chose Donald Trump, which is still disgusting to me, but whoever in her family thought that was important. We were in kindergarten, so obviously this was coming from our parents. And I remember her looking at me and we had a conversation, well, why did you choose Donald Trump? And she said, I don't know, mommy says he's got a lot of money and that's good. Why did you choose Martin Luther King Jr.? And I remember saying, because he's a civil rights leader and that's really important. When you're a child, well, for me, when I was a child, you don't understand race the way you do after years and years of experience, of course. You only understand and look at it when it becomes a topic. And my grandmother was visibly African American on one side, and my other grandmother was a little old Greek lady who's obviously white. And my parents, to me, looked white, and I looked white. So it didn't ever occur to me that there was more to race until I was in nursery school. I had a friend named Manik who was Pakistani, and I remember I came to my grandmother and I said, I have a new friend, and he's brown. And I remember the time, because I remember this happening, I remember thinking I was just being descriptive. It would be the same thing as saying he's tall or he's short or he wears sneakers or whatever. And my grandmother looked at me and she said, what does that mean, Theodora? And I said, well, he looks brown. I look white, he looks brown. And she said to me, well, you're brown too. Nobody saw me as a black person, so I was just kind of being raised as an individual, as a woman. And then I felt trapped. I felt like, well, what am I and who am I and what is the meaning of my life? And because I had no reference from my family, I didn't really know where I fit within the society. I didn't know if I was black, I didn't know if I was white, I didn't know if I was other. I just had these mixed feelings filled with confusion and didn't really have any support from my parents, or guidance, I should say, as far as racial identity. And that's when I started to understand about race. My grandmother sat me down and had a conversation with me about racial identity and about how she's my grandmother and therefore I'm also brown. And I remember I was very young at the time when this happened, and I really didn't understand why my grandmother was upset with me or mad at me or felt that she needed to scold me. A few hours later, I came up to her and I showed her a freckle that I have on my hand and I said, see, Avo was my grandmother, I'm brown too. I look white, but I'm black. What does black mean? What does white mean? From that point on, I would start to look at people and say, I wonder, are they brown like I'm brown? They don't look brown, but are brown. Or is it something that, you know, they're just white? Or is that person just brown? Or do they have white in them too? From that point on, and again, I was in nursery school when that happened, that's when race started to enter the conversation. If you look at me, I'm a person who looks white, but when I identify about my race, it's not just white. So I think it's also part of a historical experience. What people what your ancestors and what people of color have been through is internalized and brought down through the generations. I mean, I may look white and I may be perceived as white in the outside world, but I always remember the struggles of my ancestors, and the things that my grandmother and my great-grandparents may have had to battle with or struggle with is not something I forget. So for me, race isn't just about color, but it's about historical experience.
It wasn't that common for people to intermarry when I was growing up, when I was very young. So I didn't really identify with anyone. I didn't think anybody really understood me completely, including my mother and my father. I don't think they really got it. And my sister didn't really understand my confusion. For her, she didn't have the confusion that I had. I was very, very, well, you know, I'm black, I'm white, but I don't look black. I look white, but I'm not white. I don't feel comfortable with white people. I don't feel comfortable with black people. I'm kind of out there, I'm other. I do feel comfortable with black people. I do feel comfortable with, you know, so it was just a complete mix. So I never really felt all that comfortable dating white people, felt all that comfortable dating black people. I felt like black people were only dating me because of the color of my skin. I felt like white people were only dating me because they thought I was white. So it was just a complete mixture. And then I went into therapy when I went to college, and I had a black therapist, and she said, you should forget about identifying with the color, you should identify with money.
An aunt of mine, who is obviously African American, introduced me to a prospective employer, who then looked at me and said, well, how are you related? And when I said, well, my mother and her are first cousins, and so she's, I guess, my aunt or my second cousin. And then he then followed up the question innocently with, well, are you blood related? And yes, we're blood related. My grandmother and her mother are sisters. So he then spent a bit of time trying to naively figure out why I'm not obviously African American. And with that particular person, I didn't mind it, and I understood that it was more from a place of curiosity, but also it showed how ignorant that he was about racial identity in America. I mean, if you look at my mother and you looked at her sister, they're sisters, but you could see that my aunt looked very racially mixed, and my mother doesn't look as racially mixed, and they have the same parents. So, I mean, it shows that this man, who happened to be a white American, was ignorant about how race manifests itself, especially through the generations.
When I was about 13 years old, I tried to join a black acting group, and they didn't accept me because I wasn't black enough. I never really felt that I could be comfortable in the white world because I'm not white. And I wasn't really accepted in the black world because I don't look black. So as a young person, it was very difficult for me to feel that I could connect to anyone. From what I remember, I auditioned, and they said, well, you don't qualify because you're not black. We're looking for young black people. I was shocked because I thought I was black. You know, I was like, well, what do you mean I'm not black? I am black. But they said, no, we're really looking for young African American students that we can, you know, nurture and teach and develop. So I was like very, very surprised because I always thought I was black.
What are you?
What are you?
Other, different.
Biracial.
I like to think I'm a little bit of everything.
It's irrelevant.
My father is Greek, so I'm part white, I guess. My grandfather on my mother's side was Italian, and my grandmother was African American, multiracial.
My father was Italian, and my mother was biracial herself. And they lived together in Greenwich Village. I think that your grandmother was asked to leave the apartment she was renting with a friend of hers because your grandfather, being Italian, were a couple, and she refused to leave on those grounds. I mean, she was paying the rent. And according to them, your grandmother made an issue out of it, and they pretty much called her a communist. probably because they probably had problems being married and being together in that era. They wanted to make sure that my sister and I felt we were the greatest things on earth. So we were always treated that we were very special and very beautiful, and that's how we were raised.
Well, I guess in retrospect, they did go through so much, and maybe it was such ugly things that they went through. They didn't want to expose their children to the ugly side of a mixed marriage. They wanted to shelter their children from that, especially me, because I'm so much younger, and their marriage was so rocky. They didn't want to add another dynamic to the mix. But I know from little anecdotes that they would share with us that they did have problems, but I wasn't raised with any kind of identity. Like my father didn't push his Italian side, and my mother certainly didn't push her African American side at all. They wanted to raise us as individuals, as strong, independent women. They didn't want to bring the color into the mix. I don't think there were enough conversations at home about who we really are, who we really were, and what it means to be a child of a mixed background. I had to kind of create my identity for myself.
Dun, 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 dun.
Black blood, white blood.
There's a lot of white blood in me.
Oh, if you have one drop of black blood, you're black.
No, you're not black. I think Mom felt she was colored, a person of color.
Well, that was never really discussed, but I believe she considered herself a black woman that had a very light-skinned mother. Like any African Americans, most, not all, but a lot of African Americans have white blood, of course. Hers, I can only go by her mother being very, very fair and passing, and did pass to get her first job. So she was very light-skinned, and my mother's father was very dark-skinned. Her racial makeup, my grandmother's was, she didn't talk about it much, so I don't really know. I know she did pass because she got a job in a department store in Philadelphia back in the early 50s, and at that time they didn't hire black women. She didn't talk about race. She didn't want to talk. She just was that kind of a woman. She didn't want to talk about race. She considered herself a black woman, but not as far as her where she worked. I don't know. I know she passed.
What am I then? You tell me. You're the ones that set the standards, you whites. You're the ones that judge people by the color of their skins. Well, by your own standards, by the only ones that matter to you, I'm as white as you are.
Are you black?
No, I'm as white as you.
You're lying.
I'm white. White. White!
To say that I'm white would be to ignore my grandmother, but to say that I'm African American or black would be to ignore the fact that there's a lot of white blood in me. So I self-identify as multiracial, even if that's not how other people see me. In my house, it was, we are multiracial. I've had such and such experience. You will have such and such experience. We never forgot where we came from.
Oh, if you have one drop of black blood, you're black.
When I was young, I didn't have that same encouragement to develop a whole identity as being multi.
If that's what you have, then that's what you were.
I don't believe you are what you look like. I mean, you are who you are, whether you look a certain way or not. You can't deny who you are just based on the way you look. And I've always told my daughter that too, and I live my life like that. Just because I look a certain way, don't assume you know who I am. Because, I am so much more than the way I appear to be.
I think with my mother, she didn't want to taint my experience. I think for her, the way she chose to handle it is, I want you to have your experience and I want you to identify and be proud of who you are and everywhere you've come from and understand who your ancestors are and your history, But my experience is not your experience, and you should have your experience, and then, you know, we could come together and talk about it. So for my mother, it was always, yeah, Avo, who's my grandmother, is African American. That means we're African American, and that's that.
Are you almost done?
Almost. So work on those pants a little
No, no,
bit. Yeah, they're a mess. And I relaxed my hair. So for years I did that myself. I just did my own hair. Curl free, you could get that in the drugstore. That was really strong stuff. Perming the hair, which usually Caucasian people do to get curly hair, and relaxing the hair, which doesn't really have, I mean, there are Caucasian people that have very curly hair. It's the same chemical. It's just when you're relaxing your hair, you're combing it. You're combing it and combing it and combing it and combing it straight. Combing it and 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 combing it straight. When I was 13, your great-grandmother, Avo, decided that it was time for me to grow up and look a little neater. And my hair was very curly like yours. And I had a lot of it. And she took me into New York City. We lived in, of course, Rockland County. And went and had my hair chemically relaxed. And because my hair is hard to relax, the girl that relaxed it did what she was supposed to do, you know, according to the directions, because you are using a chemical, you have to be very careful. And it didn't come out straight enough. So your great-grandmother took me back and screamed and yelled at the poor girl, who didn't do anything wrong, wasn't pleased with the job, and had it done again. Straightened up a little better, of course, because it was the second time. And I just felt so sorry for the girl that was doing my hair, because she had her crying. But once I had it straightened, she created a monster. And when I got my hair relaxed, it was a lot easier to take care of. All I had to do was use big rollers. I became very obsessed. And that's why I said I used to do my hair at night before going to bed. I found that much easier to maintain my kind of hair.
What are you? Multiracial? What are you? No, I'm just part Greek. What are you? A little bit of everything. Well, what are you anyway?
When somebody would ask me, what are you, I wouldn't right away give them that information, because I knew where they were going to.
Sometimes I find it to be a very annoying question. Sometimes I find it to be very passé.
I used to like to play cat and mouse with them, to make them feel as ridiculous as the question was.
Sometimes I find it to be that people are just trying to learn about me, so it's an appreciated question.
That was, I always found it a great deal of fun.
When I've been in job interviews, I found I don't understand why this is relevant, but okay, I'll go and I'll talk about it.
Oh, race is very relevant for me because I am of mixed background. It's like a clash, a genetic makeup which is unique and very different. I feel that I understand both sides. And I feel that what my mother and father have given me by having a child of mixed race puts me at an advantage, where I understand so much more because, I have the benefit of being more than one race.
I can't answer for other people that are biracial, but I'm sure there are many that have more hang-ups about it.
My father would say, don't be ridiculous, you're a beautiful woman, don't worry about what color you are who you are. And the same thing with my mother, you're a beautiful woman, you're black, you're white, just own it and don't worry about having to say you're black or you're white. So I've always kind of been other and out there and different, and I love being that way now as a mature person. So I only felt comfortable with others.
And I fit into any group, black group, white group.
My sister had no problem associating with people that don't understand what it's like to be different. I have no patience for that. So in a way, she was much more more of a teacher than I was. Like my mother was more of a teacher. Like she would educate people, and I think my sister would also educate ignorant people. When they were coming up, how they had to cope and work through society based on the way they look was more of a teacher. I'm going to teach you about race relations, where I was never interested in teaching. My time is too important to me. I would rather not associate with people that don't have an understanding. I think they felt very comfortable being around white people that were ignorant to the black experience. They didn't have a problem with that. I always had a problem with that. So I always felt more comfortable with people that understood what other meant. But when Mom was young, she had to learn how to function around people that were ignorant. Same thing with my sister, your mother. She had to learn how to function around people that are ignorant. By the time I was born, no, you don't have to learn how to function. You don't need to tolerate ignorance. Especially Mom, she had to fight against racism, and a little bit with my sister. My sister obviously is multiracial, and I look white, so my experience was very, very different because no one really knew that I was black. Where with my sister Tawny, it's obvious that she was black.
I guess the people that I was closer to, okay, color didn't matter. There was no issue there at all.
I just noticed that I had black friends and she didn't.
I guess predominantly white.
My school was primarily white, but my group of friends was certainly not primarily white.
I thought about that. I'm like, well, why are my friends so diverse? And my sister's friends are all white.
It was usually dark-skinned black women that gave you the attitude than anybody else. Not the black man, of course, or the black teenage boy.
I thought that's interesting that she doesn't have any black friends, where I always had black, white, always. I never had exclusively one race at all.
My group of friends looked like a rainbow, and I'm proud of that.
If I did suffer discrimination, I have to say it was usually black girls, and that was in my youth. They were the ones that gave me more trouble, and even back then, I kind of understood why. They're just jealous. I mean, it's not my fault that I was born looking like this and you were looking like that, and I guess it isn't fair, but don't use me as a scapegoat. And I guess I was used more as a scapegoat by the black girls of my era, which is funny and ironic.
But when I would go to things like dances, I'd realize, my God, my school is very white. And it's not something that I had ever realized, because my particular group of friends happened to be very racially diverse. I do acknowledge that the area that I'm from is actually remarkably white. It's just funny that it never really manifested with me, except on these certain outlier occasions like school dances.
The climate of racism, and I think it's gotten worse from the feeling I get. I think in the 60s there was a breakthrough, which carried over into the 70s. And I think the 80s it started changing, the 80s and 90s it started changing. That's the feeling I get. I think it's reared its ugly head.
Just recently, I was at a party.
There was a gentleman at church who referred to our President Obama as that black guy, and that was tremendously heartbreaking for me.
It was at a memorial service, as a matter of fact, and one of the guys sitting at the table with me started talking about the president. And I said to him, I find this conversation very offensive. I'm black. You should respect him, and you certainly should respect me.
You can disagree with the man's politics, you can disagree with the man's policies, but to bring race into the conversation is, to me, devastating.
You can vote for Mitt, or you can vote for the coconut head.
So until we no longer hear those statements, I don't think we're in a post-race society.
And I'm like, excuse me? Are you referring to the President of the United States? I don't permit people at all. And my mother used to say to me, you have a responsibility to educate people. You have to educate. I'm like, no, that's not my job, no. I will not tolerate it, I don't want to discuss it, that's it. I make it very clear that, ignorance is not okay with me. But with my mother, And my sister, it was very different. They felt that they were responsible to educate people, both of them. And they did a very, very good job.
In terms of racial identity and getting into schools or better jobs, at the moment, I believe it's still necessary to consider it as a factor because, quite frankly, I don't want to see a bunch of old white men in all positions of power. I might like to operate in the mindset of a post-racial world, but that's not at all the case. And again, I work in New York City and I live in the suburbs of New York, and if I'm hearing it and it's everywhere around me in a place as diverse as New York, then I can only imagine how race is internalized in rural parts of the country like Kansas. So absolutely, I don't think we're in a post-racial world. However, I think that's the goal, and I think that's where I'd like to see our country go, but see the world go. Okay?
I did date one guy who was Jewish, and he said, and I was explaining to him how I feel, and he said to me, well, I feel that way too. It's not unique just because you're multiracial. I feel that way, and I'm Jewish, but I'm not religious, and I'm not, I don't feel that being Jewish, I'm different, but people make me feel different because I'm Jewish. And that was the only white guy. I thought, oh my God, he understands how I am. And then I thought, well, there are a lot of people that understand. You're not alone. And I always thought my experiences were very, very different. And then I realized dating John that maybe not so much. Maybe I'm a little bit wrong. Maybe we all feel a little different.